Credit card interest is terrifying. It is one of the single most destructive forces wreaking havoc on your personal finances. So how does credit card interest work? When do you pay credit card interest? And how much do you pay? Hey everyone, this is Cody with Rent Reporters, and right after you like and subscribe to our channel, we will go over a super quick rundown of when you need to pay your credit card bills to avoid credit card interest. Then we'll get into the horrors of compounding interest working against you if you're not paying your bills on time. And finally, 4 tips to avoid credit card interest, which, spoiler alert, all of them involve paying your bills off completely. But I'll go over the ways that people screw up when using credit cards and how to avoid them. So when do you need to pay your credit card bill to avoid interest? First, we have to understand how credit cards work. You have a 30-day window of time. It works out to 30.5 if we're being technical. And this window of time is called your billing period. Any purchases you put on your credit card will accrue for 30 days. And the end of that period is called the statement close date. Now, whatever balance you've accrued in that billing period is referred to as your statement balance. At least a minimum payment is due for that statement balance, typically 25 days away from the statement close date. So basically you have a 55-day window of time, 30 days to accrue a balance and then 25 days to make a payment on that balance. Now, this 25-day period is referred to as your grace period. Since you have 25 days to make a payment, you can rack up a higher balance than your statement balance because purchases made during your grace period will accrue for the next billing period. Your statement balance plus whatever you've accrued during the grace period is called your total balance. And you'll see both of these numbers when you look at your credit card statements. Now, as long as you're paying your credit card bills in full every month, you only need to worry about paying your statement balance in its entirety for the billing period by your due date. You do not need to pay the total balance in full if it is higher than the statement balance every due date. That is one of the things that trips people up when they switch from using debit or cash to trying to only use credit cards. And I'll go over that in more detail in the final segment of this video. Now, where credit card interest gets dangerous is when you don't pay the statement balance off in full because your next billing period is going to close in just 5 days after your due date. Once it does, your new statement balance is the previous statement plus the new one, which means you now have 2 months worth of credit card balances accumulating interest because if you don't pay off the statement balance in full by your due date, you get charged interest on any new balance. And the brutal cycle continues. Compounding credit card interest is why so many people are afraid of credit cards. So when do you pay credit card interest? You only accrue interest on the unpaid balance on your statement. If you pay your statement off in full, then you owe nothing in interest. That credit that you used was entirely free. And if you're using a rewards credit card that you qualified for because of your awesome credit score, maybe by getting your rent reported to credit agencies, then you just got paid to buy the things that you would normally buy. There is one exception to this, though, where you can actually owe interest even if you have no balance on your credit card, and I'll go over that in just a minute. So like I said, after your payment due date, whatever remains on the statement balance will accrue interest, and that interest compounds daily. The daily compounding rate is your APR, or annual percentage rate, simply divided by 365. Let's look at a simple example. If you have a $1,000 balance on a card with a 17% APR and you make the minimum payment, which should be about $30, then the remaining $970 will accumulate interest at about 0.0466% daily. That means the very next day after you've made your payment, you now owe 45 cents in interest. The day after that, you now get charged interest on $970.45, and so on and so forth. By the time the next payment is due 30 days later, assuming that you've made no other payments on the card, you'll have accumulated $13.55 in interest. Using this example, if you decide to, or if you can only afford to make the minimum payments on the card, it will take you 4 years to pay off that credit card and cost $367 in interest, 36.7% of your principal, and that is crazy. What's crazier, though, is that you can get charged interest even if you have no balance on the card, and that is thanks to something called residual interest. Now, the only time that you need to worry about residual interest is if you have not paid a statement balance in full. It does not apply if you completely pay your statement balance, and you should hopefully be noticing a pattern here. So residual interest is the amount of interest that gets charged between the time that you pay off your balance to the time that the payment actually gets applied. So using our example, you charged $1,000 on your credit card and you only paid the minimum on the due date. You make no new purchases on the card and you decide to pay off the statement balance in full on the next due date, which will work out to about $983.55. And you're thinking to yourself, awesome, my credit card is paid. I can sit back and not pay attention to it anymore because I am destroying the card with a flamethrower. Only to find out a week later that you still have a balance on your card. Now, this happens because from the time that you submitted your payment to the time that your payment actually processed on their end, which could be about 3 to 5 days, you were charged residual interest on that floating balance. Now, the best thing to do before making a final payoff on a card is to call and get what's called a payoff quote from the card company, because that will include the residual interest. Then pay that amount right there when you're on the phone with them. If not, you'll need to submit a second payment on the next due date. And if you don't, because maybe you don't have automatic payments set up, then you'll get hit with a late fee averaging about $37, which will also start accumulating interest, while your residual interest also racks up interest, and then you'll need to go another 2 months. One to pay the balance and the second to pay the residual interest on that balance before you finally stop paying interest. It sucks. Don't put yourself in that situation. Only spend on a credit card what you would normally spend and can afford to pay off, and pay off that statement balance every single month. But that can be easier said than done, which is why I have 4 tips to help you get into the right mindset. Alright, so how do you use credit cards without paying interest? So I started off really bad with credit cards, and then I got really good to where I was raking in points and cash back, and then I had to start a business, and then I later filed bankruptcy, and I got to start all over again. So I'm kind of an expert in this. And in my expert opinion, there are 2 ways to properly use a credit card. You either use it just for emergencies, it's there only if you need the extra money, or you can only use credit cards and stop paying with debit and cash altogether. Now, personally, I prefer the second method so that I can rack up points and rewards and lots of other perks that I'll talk about in other videos, but this is also not for everyone. And I'm not saying that you all should do this, and it's also very challenging when you're first starting out. And most people will fail during the first 2 months of transition that I call the buffer period. Because of how the billing periods worked, which I explained earlier, it takes 2 full months to fully cycle into only using credit. So here's 4 different ways that people can get tripped up and fail during that transition. Let's say that you normally spend $1,000 via debit or cash per month on normal expenses, and you decide to transition to using a credit card that has a $5,000 limit. Now, the very first way that you'll get tripped up is the easiest to fall into. You overspend. You see that big limit and you go, well, I only spent a couple $100s more because I got this brand new credit card, so I got to treat myself, so it's not a very big deal, right? Wrong. It is a very big deal, and it's very much a bad thing to do. Don't spend more than you normally do. That solves 95% of the problems that people get into with credit cards. Next is if you transition to using credit in the middle of the billing period, because that might not line up with the middle of the month. Most people budget at a monthly level, and they base that budget on their paydays. Well, your billing period might be on the 20th of the month, and if you decided to switch over to credit on the 15th of the month, you'll end up with a statement balance that is 10 days short of what your actual spending is for the month. And that can get really confusing when it comes time to pay your first credit card bills. Because you're just beginning with credit cards, you might go and pay off your statement balance on the due date thinking that you paid off the remainder of that month's expenses from the 20th when you switched to the 30th or the 31st when you next get paid, when you actually only paid off 5 days from the 15th to the 20th for your card on that statement. So by the time that next month's statement rolls around, if you're not really tracking your purchases, Well, your new statement balance is about a third higher than you expect it to be, and you might not be able to pay that in full, and you start racking up interest. To avoid this, simply look at your statement billing period dates and either wait until the start of the next billing period to start using your credit card, or you just have to be diligent with your spending and use spending tracker apps to keep you from overspending. The third way you'll get tripped up is by paying off the total balance every due date rather than just the statement balance because you think you need to in order to avoid interest charges. And this can really end up messing with your on-hand cash. You end up with either not enough to cover bills that require cash, like rent, which could force you into taking out a payday loan or using paycheck advance apps, which come with their own set of problems. Or you just end up with much lower cash on hand that you feel comfortable with and you panic and you stop using credit cards altogether. So one more time, you only owe the statement balance on your due date, not the total balance. Sometimes they're the same number, but if you switch to using credit only, then the statement balance will always be lower than the total, and that is the number that you owe on your due date. And the final way that people get tripped up when switching to credit is when they use cards that have a lower limit than what they would typically spend in a month. Playing off the earlier example, you normally spend $1,000 per month, but you decide you only want to use credit from now on. But you're just starting out, so your first credit card only has $500 on it. In this situation, you can't really use the credit cards the way that you normally would, which is accrue for 30 days and then set up an auto pay on the due date 25 days later. In this situation, you'll have to pay your bills irregularly so that you can keep using that card, and that inconsistency can be hard to manage and keep track of. It can lead you to still occasionally using your debit card or cash, and then that leads to you unintentionally overspending, as well as forgetting about making payments and getting hit with late fees. So what you need to do is, if you're in this situation, is pay the card as soon as you make a purchase on it, like the literal second after you finish making a purchase. It's a hassle and an extra step, but adopting this habit keeps you from forgetting bill payments and it keeps you from maxing out your card, which is super bad for your credit score. And as you use and pay the card, your credit score will go up, which means that you'll be rewarded with higher limits and be able to apply for better credit cards with better perks and rewards, which is why you use credit in the first place. Using credit cards and not paying credit card interest is actually really simple. Don't spend anything extra on the credit cards than you would normally spend, and pay off your statement by the due date. It takes some time to learn the right financial habits because it's very different from spending with cash and debit, but don't make the mistakes I just talked about. Pay off your statement balance every month and sit back and enjoy the perks, rewards, and flexibility of using credit. So until next time, this is Cody with Rent Reporters, and thank you so much for watching.